As the Great Depression worsened, some countries in Europe are going to turn to fascism. We'll talk a whole lot more about fascism in the next chapter. But this is essentially dictatorships, often violent and militaristic. Communist, of course, the Communist Party now is largely coming out of Russia, will embrace the New Deal and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Stalin, the leader of Soviet Russia, sees Roosevelt as an ally against Hitler. Stalin's great fear is German fascism and Hitler's rise to power, and he sees America as a potential ally in stopping Hitler. From right to the beginning of Hitler's rise to power in the early 1930s. The communists in Russia will establish an organization in America called the Popular Front. The Popular Front is actually a group of organizations, including the Communist Party and other anti-fascist organizations. They're not necessarily communist. They're simply opposed to the rise of fascist dictators in Europe. The communists will soften their rhetoric as well. They'll lose talk of revolution, particularly violent revolution, and simply talk about how the government can help people. And they'll become much more popular in America. It's very easy for many Americans to accept a criticism of capitalism when 25% of the country can't find work and people are literally starving to death. When the Spanish Civil War breaks out in the 1930s, more than 3,000 Americans will go as volunteers, not part of any organized military unit, to fight against fascism. I have a great uncle who died in the Spanish Civil War. The Communist Party directs these efforts. The American Communist Party recruits and organizes these American volunteers to go fight over there. One of them will be Ernest Hemingway, the great writer, who's already a well-established and world-renowned writer, who will go to the Spanish Civil War as a volunteer. He won't fight. I believe he drives an ambulance. In 1931, a group of unemployed Americans will have a hunger march on Washington, D.C., demanding government aid for the poor, and particularly those who can't feed themselves. The Communist Party will also organize unions. They will provide the legal defense. They'll hire the lawyers to defend the Scottsboro Boys we talked about. And all of this is directly being done under Soviet supervision in Stalin. But of course, the rising support for the Soviets in America and the Communist Party and its success in the Popular Front will come to a screeching halt in 1939 when the world finds out that Stalin, fearing that nobody would stand with him against Hitler, has signed a peace treaty, the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, with Hitler. And Hitler by then has become recognized as the monster that he is. And so the idea that Stalin has entered a peace treaty with him will destroy support here in America. The Socialist Party, which is not directed by the communists, the Soviets, under Norman Thomas, will also gain popularity. They will declare that the Great Depression is proof that capitalism doesn't really work. They'll attempt to create a biracial tenant farmer union or sharecropper union with blacks and whites together, but this will fail due to racism. The government is extremely hostile to any critics of capitalism. They're not going to stand for it. Hamilton Fish of New York and Martin Dees of Texas in the House will form a committee to try to root out communists, find them, and persecute them. But it is a high watermark for the acceptance of communism and socialism generally. We'll talk more about the Works Progress Administration next chapter. But it does challenge capitalist ideas. One of the things it does is it sends out photographers to document the Great Depression, and writers as well. Père Lorenz makes two documents, The Prow That Broke the Plains in 1936 and The River in 1937, that attack the exploitation of labor and land. The Farm Securities Administration sends out photographers to document poverty, and these pictures I'm showing you are all from a government program to record the poverty that Americans went through in the Great Depression. The most famous of these photographers would be Dorothea Lange, although there's a whole class of these that do great work, including another woman, Margaret Burke White, who's well remembered for this. That's Lange sitting on the car, and this is her most famous picture. We'll come back to this a little bit in the next chapter. We also launch a federal writers project and a federal artist project where the government is supporting literature and the arts with taxpayer dollars. Erskine Caldwell will have the first great hit piece of literature from the Great Depression about Southern poverty. It's called Tobacco Road. It's released in 1931. You see it there. Richard Wright's Native Son, which doesn't come out until 1940, is about African Americans in the ghettos during the Great Depression. James Agee and Walker Evans will release the painful portrait of three sharecropper families in 1941 called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. The title itself an attack on the whole kind of traditional America. And of course, the seminal novel of the period, John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, which if you haven't read, you really should, which comes out in 1939 and as a major motion picture in the 40s as well.